There is a person in your life who has a fully funded 401k, zero credit card debt, 3 different income streams, a paper filing cabinet in the closet, and a 14-year-old Honda Civic with 160,000 miles on it that they refuse to replace. They also just dropped $4,000 on a concert trip to see a band they have loved since 1991. And if you ask them how they are doing financially, they will pause, squint slightly, and say, okay for now. Not great, not thriving, okay for now. This person is not anxious. This person is not confused about money. This person is one of the most financially sophisticated people you are ever going to meet. And the reason they talk and act the way they do has nothing to do with pessimism in the way we usually use that word. It has everything to do with something that happened to them at a very specific moment in their financial lives that changed the way they see money, institutions, and the future permanently. That moment was not a personal failure. It was not a bad decision. It was a promise that an entire economic system made to a generation and then quietly and then very loudly broke. I'm going to take you through exactly what happened to Generation X, why their financial behaviors look contradictory on the surface, but are actually one of the most logical adaptations to economic betrayal in modern American history, and why the habits that look strange from the outside are exactly what you would design if you knew the rules of the game were going to change without warning. Stay with me because the psychological framework that drives this generation is one of the most powerful financial survival tools ever developed. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand not just how they think, but why. If you are not already thinking some version of this yourself, you probably should be. If this is your first time on this channel, subscribe right now because this is what we do here every single week. We go beneath the surface of financial behavior and show you the psychology, the history, and the math that actually explains why people do what they do with money. I am David Marshall, and let us get into it. Let me take you back to 1983. The year does not matter because of anything that happened on the news that year, though plenty did. It matters because 1983 is the year that a child born in 1965 turns 18, which means this is the year that the first wave of what we now call Generation X begins its adult relationship with the American economy. And the economy they are entering makes a very specific, very clear, very confident promise. Here's what that promise looked like. You go to school. You get a job at a good company, you stay loyal, you work hard, the company takes care of you. There's a pension waiting for you at the other end of 30 years. Social Security will supplement it. And if you save a little on top of that in the 401k that Congress just created in 1978, you will retire comfortably and everything will be fine. The formula is boring. The formula is unglamorous. But the formula works, and it has been working for your parents and their parents, and you have every reason to believe it will work for you. This is the world that Generation X enters as young adults, not optimistically necessarily. Gen X is not known for optimism, but functionally, contractually, the deal seems real, the system seems stable, the rules seem set. And then the system changed the rules. Not all at once, it was gradual at first. The pensions started disappearing from private sector employment through the 1980s and 1990s, replaced by 401k plans that shifted the risk of retirement funding from the employer to the employee. Suddenly, the company was not responsible for your retirement, you were. And most people in their 30s and 40s at the time did not fully clock what that shift meant for their future. Then corporate America started discovering that loyalty was expensive. The wave of layoffs that rolled through the 1990s under the polished language of downsizing and restructuring meant that the 30-year career at one company started becoming a historical artifact. People who had given 15 years to an organization were walking out with a cardboard box and a handshake, not because they performed poorly, because a spreadsheet somewhere said it was more efficient to eliminate the position. Gen X watched this happen to their parents, to older colleagues, and they filed it away. Then 2008 arrived. And 2008 was not a market correction, it was not a cycle, it was a detonation. The S&P 500 fell more than 50% from its 2007 peak to its 2009 bottom. Retirement accounts that people had spent 20 years building were cut in half in less than 18 months. Homes that were supposed to be the foundational asset of middle-class American wealth went underwater as property values collapsed in markets across the country. People in their early 40s who had done everything right, saved consistently, bought a home, stayed employed, were suddenly staring at a financial picture that looked like it had been set on fire. And the thing that made 2008 uniquely devastating for Gen X was not just the scale of the loss, it was the timing. By 2008, the oldest Gen X members are 43 years old. The youngest are in their late 20s, which means a significant portion of this generation was right in the middle of what should have been their highest earning, highest saving, highest compounding years. The years when the math of wealth building is most powerful. The years when the money you put in has the most time to grow, and those years got detonated. This is what financial psychologists call sequence of returns risk in its most brutal real-world form. The timing of a catastrophic market event relative to your peak earning and saving years matters enormously. A 25-year-old who lost 50% of their portfolio in 2008 had 35 years to recover. A 43-year-old Gen X investor who lost 50% of their portfolio in 2008 had maybe 20 years, had already missed the most powerful compounding years of their working life, and was watching their home value collapse at the same time their retirement account was hemorrhaging. The math did not forgive that timing the way it forgives younger investors. And Gen X knew it. And this is where everything you see in Gen X financial behavior starts to make complete sense. Not as contradiction, not as confusion, as adaptation. The system changed the rules at the worst possible moment, and the response was not to abandon the game. It was to rebuild with a completely different set of assumptions about what the game was actually going to do next. The psychological term for what happened to this generation is defensive pessimism, and it is a real documented behavioral finance concept, not just a phrase. Defensive pessimism is the cognitive strategy of assuming that negative outcomes are likely so that you can prepare for them obsessively without being paralyzed by fear. It is the opposite of optimism, and it is also the opposite of pure anxiety. An anxious person imagines disaster and freezes. A defensive pessimist imagines disaster and builds a bunker just in case. This is why Gen X has the highest 401k participation rates of any generation currently in the workforce. Not because they are confident about retirement, but because they are terrified about what happens if they do not have one. The 401k is not a wealth-building tool in the way they think about it. It is an escape tunnel. It is the emergency exit they are building in real time because they watched an entire generation of people discover there was no emergency exit when they needed one most. And this is the first time I am going to use that phrase in this video, but not the last. Because escape tunnels are the core architecture of how financial survivalists think. Every financial decision a Gen X person makes, if you look at it through the right lens, is either building an escape tunnel or protecting one that already exists. Let us talk about the side hustle, because this is the one that gets the most attention from outside observers and gets the most misread. People look at a 47-year-old Gen X professional who has a full-time corporate job, sells handmade goods on Etsy on weekends, does occasional consulting at night, and might have a rental property, and they assume one of two things. Either this person is greedy and never satisfied, or this person is anxious and does not know how to relax. Both of those readings are wrong. The side hustle for financial survivalists is not about ambition. It is not about lifestyle upgrade. It is about the specific, visceral, extremely personal fear of the cardboard box moment. You know the one. You have probably seen it in a movie or maybe in real life. The moment where someone gets called into the HR office and walks out carrying everything they own from their desk in a cardboard box, escorted to the elevator, badge deactivated, email cut off, 22 years of professional identity erased in an afternoon. Gen X watched that happen to real people, to people who did everything right. And a significant portion of the generation made a quiet, private decision that they would never be entirely dependent on one income source again. The system changed the rules on people who had built their entire financial lives around a single stream. So Gen X built multiple streams, not as a hustle culture statement, as insurance, as redundancy by design. If the Etsy shop makes $800 a month, that is $800 a month that keeps coming in even if the corporate job disappears tomorrow. The consulting clients represent a skill set that exists independent of any employer. The rental property generates income that does not require a performance review. Each additional income stream is another escape tunnel dug quietly in the background while the primary career continues on the surface. This is not paranoia. This is pattern recognition from lived experience. And it is one of the most rational responses to institutional betrayal that I have ever seen documented in financial behavior. Now here is where the story gets psychologically fascinating, because Gen X does not just distrust employers, they distrust institutions broadly, banks, financial advisors, brokerage firms, government agencies, the entire apparatus of institutional authority that was supposed to be the scaffolding of a stable financial life. And this distrust does not manifest as opting out of the financial system entirely. It manifests as something much more sophisticated. It manifests as self-education. Gen X invented the personal finance spreadsheet culture before there were apps to do it automatically. They read the books, bought the money management guides, sat with the amortization tables, built their own retirement projections in Microsoft Excel with formulas they figured out themselves. They asked the questions themselves instead of trusting someone else to manage it. And they became what you might call DIY financial experts, not because they thought professional advisors were incompetent, but because they understood through experience that the incentives of the institution are not always aligned with the interests of the individual. A financial advisor who earns commission on the products they recommend has an incentive structure that may or may not point in the direction of your best interest. A pension fund manager, whose company was quietly underfunding the liability for 15 years before declaring bankruptcy, has interests that were not aligned with the retirees who were depending on that fund. A bank that was packaging risky mortgages and selling them as safe investments in 2006 and 2007 was serving the institution's short-term profit, not the borrower's long-term stability. Gen X watched all of these things happen, not in textbooks, in real life. And they drew the logical conclusion that the safest financial advisor they were ever going to find was probably themselves, armed with enough information to make their own decisions. People do not lie, institutions do. That is not a cynical statement if you are Gen X. It is an observed truth drawn from multiple data points across a lifetime. The pension that was promised and then dissolved. The job security that was implied and then evaporated. The housing market that was supposed to be the safest investment in America and then lost half its value in 2 years. The pattern is consistent enough that assuming the institution will eventually move the goalposts is not pessimism. It is a reasonable prior based on available evidence. And this is why you see something that looks contradictory when you look at Gen X brand loyalty. They will leave an employer in a heartbeat if a better opportunity presents itself. They have no emotional attachment to the company logo, but they will drive a Ford F-150 forever. They will buy Levi's until the day they die. They will drink the same brand of coffee they started drinking at 25. Consumer brand loyalty is extremely high. Institutional brand loyalty is extremely low. And the reason is the same principle from both directions. People, meaning the products and experiences that have delivered consistently, are trustworthy. Institutions, meaning the structures and corporations and systems that have incentives beyond your welfare, are not. Let us talk about the concerts, and the travel, and the experiences, because this spending pattern is maybe the most misunderstood financial behavior in the entire Gen X profile. From the outside, it looks like hypocrisy. You drive a 14-year-old car and clip coupons and refuse to upgrade your phone, and then you drop $3,500 on a trip to see a band you have loved since 1989. People see this and think it is irrational. It is not irrational at all. It is one of the most logically consistent investment decisions this generation makes once you understand the framework. Gen X calls this, sometimes consciously and sometimes not, the unrepossessable asset. A car can be repossessed, a house can go underwater, a 401k can lose half its value in 18 months. But the memory of standing in a crowd of 50,000 people watching a band play the song that defined your 20s cannot go underwater, cannot be repossessed, cannot be eliminated by a market crash or a layoff or a corporate restructuring. The return on investment of experiences is not measured in dollars. It is measured in something that market volatility cannot touch. This is not escapism. It is portfolio diversification into a different asset class entirely, one that financial survivalists instinctively understand has zero correlation to the S&P 500 and zero counterparty risk. The experience already happened. It already has value. Nobody can take it back. For a generation that watched people lose the tangible financial assets they had spent decades building, the intangible but permanent asset of lived experience makes a lot of financial sense. Now let us get into the one financial area where Gen X shows up with what looks like real contradiction, and it deserves an honest examination. Debt. Because Gen X carries significant debt, the mortgage, sometimes student loan balances that followed them into their 40s, auto loans on occasion. And this sits uncomfortably next to the aggressive 401k contributions and the multiple income streams in the self-managed portfolio. How do financial survivalists carry debt? The answer is strategic debt versus chaos debt, and Gen X makes this distinction with extreme precision even if they do not always articulate it that way. A fixed-rate 30-year mortgage at 4% on a home in a stable neighborhood is strategic debt. The interest rate does not change. The payment is predictable for the life of the loan. The asset is real and tangible even if it can lose value in the short term. It is a known quantity, a containable risk. Credit card debt at 22% variable interest with a minimum payment that barely covers the interest accrual is chaos debt. It is the financial equivalent of quicksand. It gets worse the longer you are in it, and there is no fixed horizon. Gen X as a generation tends to carry the first category and avoid the second with genuine intensity, not because they are perfect, not because financial stress never happens, but because the visceral understanding of what it feels like to have an obligation you cannot control or predict is deeply embedded in their economic psychology. And then there are the paper files. I want to spend a moment here because it matters more than it sounds. Gen X is statistically far more likely than millennials or Gen Z to maintain physical paper records of financial documents. Tax returns going back 15 years, insurance policies in a physical folder, mortgage documents in a binder, account statements printed and filed. People younger than Gen X look at this and see inefficiency. Why print what you can store in the cloud? The answer comes back to 2008 and to every institutional failure Gen X has lived through. What happens to the cloud when the institution managing it fails? What happens to the digital record when the company that holds it gets acquired, restructured, or shut down? What happens when the website goes down? Redundancy by design is not inefficiency. It is a survival system built by people who have experienced, more than once, what it looks and feels like when systems you depend on stop working without warning. The paper file is an escape tunnel that does not require electricity or institutional solvency to work. Let me bring this all together because I want to make sure the core insight of this video lands clearly. Generation X is not contradictory, they are adapted. They are the financial expression of a generation that was handed a set of rules, built their lives around those rules with genuine discipline and commitment, watched the system change the rules at the worst possible moment, and then spent the next 15 years quietly rebuilding a financial life that does not require the rules to stay stable. Every behavior that looks strange from the outside, the old car and the concert tickets, the multiple income streams in the physical filing cabinet, the 401k aggression and the deep distrust of advisors, every single one of it is part of the same coherent system. A system designed by financial survivalists who learn the hard way that the only financial security you can fully trust is the kind you build and control yourself. This is not a sad story. It is actually one of the most impressive examples of generational financial adaptation in modern American economic history. A generation that absorbed a seismic economic betrayal, processed it, and rebuilt not with bitterness but with architecture, escaped tunnels, multiple streams, unrepossessable assets, redundancy by design. If you look at it through the right lens, it is not pessimism at all. It is one of the most rational, well-engineered responses to an irrational economic environment ever quietly assembled. Before I close, I want to say what I say at the end of every video on this channel, because I believe it is the truest thing I know about why any of this matters. Money is not the goal, money is oxygen. And nobody understands that more viscerally than a generation that once had their oxygen supply cut off with almost no warning. Gen X does not accumulate financial survivalist habits because they love spreadsheets or because they are incapable of enjoying life. They build escape tunnels and maintain paper records and clip coupons while buying concert tickets, because they understand that oxygen is not something you take for granted once you have felt what it is like to run low on it. They are building their supply not so they can live for money, but so money can never again hold hostage the things in their life that actually matter. If this video gave you a new way to see this generation, or maybe yourself, share it with someone who would appreciate it. And subscribe right now if you have not already, because next week we go inside the millennial money paradox, the generation that was told to invest but could not save, and the specific economic forces behind why both things are true at the same time. I am David Marshall. I will see you then.